Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are here for another glorious edition of Ask That. And today we're going to talk about cities being smart. And I'm not talking about the people. Well, maybe I am talking about the people. I don't really know what we're going to talk about, but we're going to talk about smart cities. And with me today, I got Marisa Morby. Marisa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So, we're going to have a great conversation. I am looking forward to this. With that being said, before we start chatting, why don't you introduce who you are and everything that you're about?
All right. My name is Marisa Morby, and I am the head of research at a digital agency called Clearhead, where we do experience optimization. So a lot of A/B testing, data science, and research. And I lead up the research team there. So that means I'm talking to clients, managing a team, and creating research as a product.
So, while that all sounds fantastic, we're not actually going to talk about that.
We're not. No, we're not going to talk about that at all.
All right. So let's talk about the smart city. We got into it a little bit, before we hit the go live button. And I kind of want to pick right back up.
Yep.
You started with, you like to travel and you went around the globe. Like, why? Let's just jump on that airplane.
All right, so we can board that airplane again and start right over.
That's right.
So in the past couple of years, I've gotten the opportunity to travel to many different cities in Europe, Southeast Asia, and Japan. And so in doing that, I always like to stay in the bigger cities and try them out, see what they're all about. And in doing that, I've noticed in the States, in Europe, in Asia, everything is set up a little bit differently. And it
Sure.
got me thinking, as I stayed in these cities, some cities made me feel so much better than other cities. And as I was looking at that and kind of seeing, well, why do I feel better here than I did, 2 cities ago?
Yeah.
When I looked at that, I started to think, well, these cities are all set up so differently. As I've lived all over the different states in the U.S., and I kind of used to think that cities were all the same.
Yeah.
But as I've gotten older, I've noticed that the setup is different every single time.
Sure.
And so this kind of started me on a journey of looking at how cities are set up and why.
Yep.
And so in doing that, I've read a lot of, it's been my own personal curation and curiosity. I've just been looking at how different cities are set up around the world. What cities are really embracing this idea of a smart city, which isn't necessarily it's not necessarily what we would consider. It doesn't necessarily mean there's cameras watching us and there's data everywhere.
Sure.
But it's using research and psychology and how people actually want to live to create something that makes a city that's livable and helps us be happier and equitable too.
So when you say these cities made you feel differently, I mean, what was the feeling that you got from them, and then what was it about the cities that garnished that feeling?
Yeah, so a lot of the cities that we went to were more car centric, and we've seen this across the U.S. in a couple different cities as well, where in order to get somewhere, you have to go there by car.
Sure.
It's really difficult to get around any other way, and living in those places, it's much less fulfilling because you can't walk around, you can't bike, you can't take the tube or the metro. And so we see that different cities that have different public transportation infrastructure and are set up in a way that allow people to have more pedestrian access and more biking mobility end up being more equitable. So, people have a better standard of living across the board.
Sure.
And in addition to that, you're happier because you're actually being able to expend more physical activity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And the best part of that, which I think I don't know if cities are starting to understand this a little bit more, is that as that happens, as you get more pedestrian traffic, as there's more people biking and being outside, you're actually doing better for businesses as well. So it's an economic boost to have people actually live in the city and walk around in the city rather than driving from point A to point B and C.
But is there a critical mass of people that makes that? I mean, are we talking? We're certainly not talking about the 5,000 person city. We're talking
Right.
about millions of people in the city, I
Millions of
assume.
people.
Sure.
Hmm.
So how much does the density play into that equitable feeling?
I think that density, as we are watching places like Vancouver, British Columbia, as they're kind of getting more and more people and having to deal with urban density, we're seeing that it plays a huge role in making sure that we've got like lower cost, more affordable housing integrated in different places. So you have millions of people, right? But we have to figure out a way to get them into all places throughout the city. And I think Singapore is a really good example of this,
Okay.
where they actually, like, they have millions of people within their city, but the way that they've created housing is to they create equitable housing in different areas throughout the city, and so that means that people have better access to get anywhere they want with public transportation and being able to walk around. So I went on a tangent. Did I answer
No,
your
no, yeah.
question?
I mean, and so like the follow up to that is where does like the age of the city
Hmm.
influence that that whole thing? Because you have a
Hmm.
city like Chicago, which
Hmm.
top three city in the U.S. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not like you're going to go bust down a 75-story
Hmm.
building to make a bike path. So you're
Right.
somewhat physically limited on what you can do based upon the
Hmm.
planning that had happened in the
Hmm.
early 1900s.
Hmm. Yeah, we are a little bit limited in that, but there are people now that are companies that are cropping up that are actually doing like urban revitalization. So they're taking what already exists, like that structure, right? A big
Sure.
building, and rethinking and redefining how it's going to be used.
Okay.
And you can do that without knocking down the building. Instead, maybe you change the zoning. So if your original zoning laws said like you had to have 5 businesses in this little area,
Okay. Sure.
now we say, here's a new zoning law. And instead of just having 5 businesses that are like just banks or something, we can have restaurants, we can have florists, we can have a local market. And then that way it makes it easier to walk around and to be a part of your city
Sure.
and
Sure.
create that foot traffic.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so is that the city being mindful of it, or is it the population that's kind of pushing it? I mean, how did these cities get there?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So with Singapore, and granted, I'm not an expert, so please someone correct me if I'm wrong. But from what I've seen and read, so Singapore, when it gained its independence, it actually didn't want to be independent.
Oh,
So it was,
interesting.
yeah, it was. The UK was like, okay, well, bye. And they said, no, wait, no, we don't want to do that. And they had to, they had no choice. And so they were then kind of on their own, right? And after looking around and seeing what other cities were doing, the government itself said, hey, we want to make sure that we are creating a city that is more mindful of the people itself. And so they took a lot of steps, like I mentioned before, around this equitable housing and making all these really integrated green spaces for people to live in. And then I think the people kind of latched onto that, and that's
Sure.
become a very mindset
Yeah. Yeah.
thing. Same with Amsterdam a little bit, where, in the 1970s, it was car central. Like
Yeah.
you could not walk around there at all. But in that case, it was more of the people than talking to the government and making it work for them, where, there were all these cars. It was really difficult to get anywhere by walking or biking. And eventually the people were like, we don't want to do this. This is terrible. We don't have room to do
Yeah.
this anymore. Like there's
Yeah.
just it's not sustainable. And so they worked to kind of recreate how the roads work there,
Yeah.
and revitalized biking. And now, like, of course, it's one of like the biggest biking cities in the world.
Sure.
So that was really more the people pushing that forward than the government. And then the government finally coming along with it when they saw that drive.
Now, have you seen similarities between these cities in how in what they're doing? I mean, are they essentially, I don't want to say copying one another, but taking
Hmm.
inspiration from one another, or are they drastically different in their approach to? I don't really know. Well, you said smart city, so we'll stick down the smart
Yeah,
city
down the
category.
smart city route.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's not something I wouldn't have thought of. When I think of smart city, I think of 5G and I can jump into a hyperloop and I'm on the other side and I didn't have to think about it. But as somebody who is a resident of the larger population of Chicago, we are far from smart or 5G or safe for that matter. But,
Yeah, and I think a smart city is like a combination of data, research, and psychology, and like using those things together. But I do think a lot of these cities have kind of bounced off of one another. The community that's really kind of creating and driving these changes is actually pretty small and insular. From what I've read, there's like a smaller collective of people that are really pushing this idea forward and trying to help make sure that cities know what's going on. And so,
I was going to ask, like, what's their motive? Like, what are they getting out of it?
Well, from what I've seen, they're really getting out of it. There's the economic impact, right? It does have a really good economic impact, but also if the people in your city are happier, you're safer. There's less crime, there's, and when there's more equity and people are able to find jobs, the city itself is just healthier. And so it's all around better for everybody. So I think that their motive, they're kind of trying to bridge that gap between community and government, to make sure that our cities are safer and more prosperous. So that's really their payoff.
And when you say that, I mean, you're really talking about not big company, but small companies prospering. I mean, and I think that's, I don't know, I feel like maybe this is just a US thing as somebody who has owned multiple small companies, like it feels almost impossible to become, hey, it's a huge startup cost to play in this game. And so that's hard. I mean, that's a hard thing to scale.
Yeah, it is a hard thing to scale. And I think in the US especially, because we do need to work on that, not even more global level, but like nationally, we're just like a huge country. So it makes it really difficult. But being able to set up neighborhoods where people can live and have these businesses integrated makes it easier for those smaller businesses to prosper. So like we just moved back to Portland, Oregon, in the last like week or so. And we were in Austin before, and we've seen just in the few days that we've been here, a lot of smaller businesses that are just right in our neighborhood that we can walk to. And we do walk to them and we do support them. So if we're taking the time to kind of rethink about how we're zoning our buildings so that we can have these businesses in like old warehouses and things like that and keep them in the community, people will go to them. Just by virtue of them being close, right?
Just by the mere fact that they pass by.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's where the psychology comes in, because like people see things over and over again, and eventually it just sticks in their brain, right? Once it's repeated over and over. Yeah.
How then? I mean, so you mentioned the U.S. being a large population, obviously not just in land but in people. And by far not the largest across the world. But we are, and we were talking about this right before we came on, the cities are very different culturally, how they're set up, what they do, the governments that involved. And I've always found it fascinating in Europe, when you bounce around between the countries, it's also, it starts to feel a bit like the United States, right? You can go from Bulgaria to Germany on a hour flight, or Austria or whatever, and you can bounce around these little countries, and they are very different, which is much like Chicago, LA, New York, Austin, Miami. Like they are all very different. Where do you think there's a city that's getting it right, or are we just hampered in the U.S.? I feel at times like it was progressive as we are in some areas is far behind as we are in others when you hear about the things that are happening in Japan and Singapore and where else where, the internet's flying out of their ears and hyperloops and
Yeah.
I mean, are we just stuck in our ways, or do we have like governmental issues that are stopping that, or infrastructure? Because I don't know. You're in Port. You've now been in two hipster cities, so I mean,
I have. I
it's
have. And well,
you can
and
check
Norfolk,
those.
Virginia, and so like all over.
Sure, but you got the hipster ones down. So you
I
guys,
did.
Portland, Austin, you guys are doing it right, and everybody else is doing it wrong.
I do think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think, and I don't want to get super political, but what I've noticed just in the mindset of Americans versus like Europeans, or
Sure.
what I've seen in where I've visited in Asia, that we honestly have, this is going to sound so bad, we have such low standards,
Yeah, totally.
like so low. It's amazing to me. And I think
it's
that
amazing that we accept it.
yes, but we don't. So, and that's the thing, is like, we think, okay, well, we need these roads so that we can drive the car, right, to get to the place I want to
Right.
be. But you don't. If we had public transportation, if we had, I don't know, like China or Japan, who have high-speed trains, like the United States is prime
Yeah.
prime real estate
Right.
for a high-speed train. Like,
Yep.
we're huge.
Yep.
We've got less mountainous regions than China.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, if
Especially
China
in Illinois.
exactly, nothing but flat
Yeah.
forever. So when I see things like that, I think that the root thing is like, we just have such low standards, possibly because of lack of exposure. Because, as U.S. citizens, we do have the ability to travel within the U.S., like only within the U.S., and see so many amazing things, right?
Yeah, yep.
There's all these things we can do outside. There's all these different cultures within our own country, which is wonderful, but it insulates us from actually seeing how other people are doing it.
Sure.
And so our standards, I think, for one, stay really low. And then in addition to that, I think that there's a huge infrastructure problem that we've been on and off trying to tackle throughout the years since like the 70s.
So, but do you really think that we've tried to tackle it versus just kept it status quo? Like, I feel like we've actually just created a pile of bullshit around it. And it's like, yeah, we're just going to throw another layer of asphalt down because in 2 years I can still go get my money. And and I'm not against big company, because there's a lot of capital that it takes to like blow up a road and redo it right. But you also have to be willing to like drop the money and then be done with it. And I know there's lots of startups that have tried to create like the roads made out of plastic, and the ones that I don't want to say they're solar panels, but it's a solar grid that you can drive on. But I look around Chicago and I see, not that I can substantiate this at all, but like this political corrupt mainstream thing that says, I've got my government, I've got my contracts, I'm going to lay my asphalt down. The road's already there, 2 years, whatever, we'll be on there, and you could take your 4-hour drive and stick it, because that's just the way it's going to be. And oh, by the way, here's a toll road that you could just keep paying on every day, and we'll just keep making our millions and billions of dollars that we do, and they kind of go out the window. And when I see that, and I see the other side, I feel like I agree, and yet I feel like the people in charge.
Well, I mean, what incentive do the people in charge have to change that?
Yeah,
Absolutely
yes,
none,
yeah.
right? And I totally agree with that. Like, if you are getting lobbying money from a company that's going to give you millions of dollars, you're not going to change anything.
Sure.
You have no incentive to do that in any way. But I think that combined with the fact that like our standards are low and we don't push to have something else is keeping us where we are. I do think that we've talked a lot in the past few years about infrastructure, like increasing money for infrastructure. I know that like in Texas, for instance, they were talking about doing a high-speed train, which for Texas is amazing, right?
But I've been on that train from Round Rock to Austin, and it's not high speed at all. That thing does not move fast.
But they finally pushed a measure through, supposedly, that's going to get it to go from Houston to Austin, I think it was.
Yeah.
And so, but of course that'll probably get killed, right? Because there's no incentive from the companies to do that. And I think maybe that then begs the question, what incentive do they need? And this is the thing that always bothers me is like, at least in America, we're probably not going to do the right thing because it's right or best. We're going to do it because it has the economic backing. And I think that finding a way to make these cities that are more livable and have more data behind them and more research behind them, making those things economically viable is going to change the conversation for the U.S.
Yep.
And I think that that's where the gap is right now.
Yeah, I mean, I always look at like the big tech companies, right? They do their best. They do their best when they have become complacent and they're getting their ass kicked, and then all of a sudden it's like, holy hell! Like look at how they changed the world and the things that they've done. And I feel like the U.S. doesn't feel like it's going to get its ass kicked in any way. I mean, in this sense, from a living standpoint, right? Like, oh, it's the best thing ever, and it's like, maybe not anymore. You know, I mean, if you're in Europe, the values of one's family and vacation and work-life balance are way better than they are in the U.S. And the fact that we haven't, as a society, said, "What the hell's like? Why are we even continuing to do this?" is beyond me. But then you have the states who then, I mean, Illinois, we have more people leaving per day in Illinois than any other state, and yet we haven't. You sort of see some of that, but like, is it going to take like the state clearing out before people are just tired of the shit? And then it's like, well, no, fix it.
I mean, you know, I don't know, and I've thought about this so much because I think we just get so worried about being able to support ourselves and make sure that we've got what we need, because we don't feel like, so like take the family, vacation and the focus around family. When we don't feel that our society and our government is supporting us as a unit, we become very defensive, right? And we just have to protect what we've got.
Sure.
Like that's a normal, natural instinct
right.
to say like, oh, something's going to happen and I'm not going to be safe.
Right.
And so I think that even when people leave, it's probably not going to turn attention to it because the people that are left are going to feel afraid that something bad is going to happen to them. And so I think that in order to create these cities, to create these communities where we feel safe, we have to demand more, not just from where we live, but from our governments as well. Like we should not be afraid that something is going to be gone tomorrow, right? And I feel that is kind of that's a national feeling right now. There's a root of fear, and no one makes a good decision out of fear. Ever. And so, and I don't know, like, I think cities like Chicago they have so much potential to be able to create these amazing places. They've got the density, they've got the people to be able to create this. And like, you know, when Chicago, I can't remember what year it was, but when we got, Chicago is one of the first places to get internal plumbing. They raised the entire city. So like, there's been innovation for years and years. And if they can literally raise up an entire city to put in plumbing for millions of people, we can figure out how to create cities that people can live in again.
So where does the tech side play into this? Because you've got, you know, Amazon, who arguably is really pushing the retail side of things. You know, they've become, you know, I mean, has it even been a decade? I mean, they've gone from, you know, a bookstore to like every damn transaction in the world is practically going through them, and you can get food. You know, they arguably will become the biggest grocery store chain, delivering, you know, dropping bananas via drones and
healthcare, because they're potentially buying that as well.
I say God, I hope, but I say that in the realm of I hope somebody goes and disrupts it. You know, and it only is going to happen with somebody who has a giant amount of capital, because it's just too backed by, I don't know.
Yeah.
big,
Well,
big corp.
I think that maybe, like, yes, I agree with you, but also if people decide they don't agree with that and they don't want that, like, we as people, as citizens, we have the power to change that, but we have to do it with our wallets. We have to say, like, I know it's easier and cheaper, but I'm
Sure.
not going to buy.
Right. And so the hard part with that, with the healthcare piece is because of the borders that are around it. Even though I live on the border of two states, I
Mm-hmm.
can't get healthcare in Wisconsin, and I'm 2 miles from the border. Like, that is
Right.
such an artificial. There could be a hospital on the other side that's
Mm-hmm.
2 miles away, and yet I'd have to go 20 miles the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
Like, such an artificial thing. And back to your point about people being afraid. Like, if your only option is to get healthcare through your company, then
Mm-hmm.
it makes it hard to do all the other
Of
stuff.
course.
Yeah.
But the reason that we do that is, like, we just don't trust our government anymore.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like,
Right.
there's such a, and I don't think that, like, this has been happening for years and years and years,
Yeah.
that we,
Yeah. This
we
isn't the
don't,
current administration. This
no,
is
it's,
decades
it's
of problems.
everything.
Yeah.
It is decades and decades. And I think that is one of the issues that I've kind of seen where it's different is, like, in Europe, and not, now this is not across the board, so I don't want to paint like this wide brush, right? But
Yeah.
there is a lot more trust that the government is going to help them, right? They have an expectation
Sure.
that the government is there to serve the people. And it feels like now we've lost that trust, one. And two, I think collectively as a nation, a lot of us would say we feel that the government is there to serve corporations.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so
yeah.
things like Amazon really are terrifying, because if they have control of your food, your health care, your
Yep.
like everything you
Yeah.
buy,
Yeah.
what are we going to do? And I think the only thing we can do is, other than like vote, which is an entirely different political conversation, is also vote with our wallets by
Yeah.
not agreeing to give money to companies like that.
Yeah.
But I do think that when you were asking about data, like, how does data and technology come into this? Well, I guess you said, how does technology come into this? I think it comes into this in a few ways. So the intersection of tech, like software and people, is absolutely fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how we interact with the world around us and
Yeah.
how we
Oh, totally.
interact with the technology we have is just fascinating. But in addition to that, we've got the ability now with data to be able to see, for instance, how pedestrians are walking around streets. So we're able to, like, make streets safer and more walkable by changing the traffic lights, say at your, like, the
Sure.
intersection by your house.
Sure.
We'd be able to change those based on the data that we get from pedestrians walking around, and aggregating all that data, so that we make it safer for you and your family to walk around just around your area of the city. And so,
So now that takes us back to the government and trust thing. I mean, now we have to be willing to give up that quote unquote personal freedom of wherever I want. I mean, I'm, using that loosely, but
well, I mean, it's gone already, right? That freedom, because it's
Yeah.
like we've willingly given over almost all of the data about ourselves,
Sure.
which then brings up a whole other issue of making
Right.
sure that we've got laws around data privacy and ethics, which I know next to nothing about, but I know there's not enough laws about it.
No, well, but I mean, but there are countries like it's not a country, but the EU is pushing that very hard, and good for them. Like, that somebody's going to have to do it.
And it is good for them. I think that, but I wonder if, who started that? Was it people saying, I think it was partially people saying, hey, we want to, like, with the mandate that they have that you can, like, erase your online presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People said they wanted that. They needed that for, like, a lot of domestic violence issues and things like that. People needed to not be able to be found, right?
Yeah.
And so that, again, is people demanding something and knowing that their government is going to do it and is behind.
Yeah, it's a tricky divide. It's like it's super, like you said, the intersection between technology and people, or data and people, and the fact that we're on this machine learning and AI, and we have cameras and smartphones and all the stuff that we can do, does change the city landscape.
It does.
And not just big city, like I live in the sticks, and
Mm-hmm.
there's all the opportunity for us to be super progressive in what we do because we do have the land. It's easy to put in infrastructure. Like the decision tree should be a lot less where I live of 5,000 people than
Mm-hmm.
it is of somebody who's like if you think of the smart grid and you think of 5G, you could take my little 5,000, 3,000 person town and 5G adoption in our town, they should
Oh,
be
yeah.
all over it because it
Oh,
makes
yeah.
way more sense than dropping down fiber lines for the Comcast and Turners or whoever owns those old dilapidated infrastructure when it's country roads and trees, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why would
Mm-hmm.
we not invest in tomorrow versus today? Uh,
But
not
then that begs the question of like who's getting involved, like whose voices are being heard, and if the only people that show up are the companies,
yeah,
like to those community meetings, then what comes out of it is their decision,
yeah,
and I just think this is another kind of wide brush, but it's very difficult to become active in the U.S. Um, like we don't get things in the mail that let us kind of
be
passively give
involved.
our
Sure.
advice and get
Yeah.
involved. We have to physically show up. And if you've got, a full-time job, if you've got a
Yep.
family and
Yep.
kids, when do you have time
Yep.
to physically go and show up to those
Right.
community meetings? And you have to, you're still a part of the community.
Right. Right.
Your opinion
Yep.
should still be heard, but our system isn't set up to do that in a very good way.
Yeah. And of course, you know, we said this earlier, we're in this place like where the work life balance doesn't really matter. So these things aren't at convenient times based upon today's
No.
reality of work and soccer and whatever else
And
needs to happen.
you can't take that time a lot of times.
Right.
You're not allowed to just, I got to
Right.
go to
Right.
this meeting, so
Right.
bye.
Right.
It's very few people that get the opportunity and flexibility to do that. And a lot of times the people that do aren't necessarily they're not necessarily the only voice that needs to be heard.
Sure.
There's a lot of voices that just don't ever get represented in those types
Sure.
of meetings.
And let's be honest, the meetings suck. I mean, as somebody who's been to some,
Yeah.
I mean, it's so rooted in pound the gavel on the table and formal process and which all good, but it's 2018.
Exactly. Let's do something else.
I mean, you and I are talking, thousands of miles apart over our shitty internet connection and somehow live streaming this to the world, and yet I have to show up at the little courthouse, and check in, and so and
And
so
do all
says
that
you
stuff.
can speak.
And really, it should be something that's, smartphones, especially in the U.S., are completely, almost universal at this point, right?
Yeah.
So why isn't there a way to interact with your city and your community meetings
Right.
just through your smartphone?
Right.
A vote, there's a secure platform that we can send out, an app that people can get, and they can just vote from their phone.
Right.
It would be so simple to be able to do that. And that to me is another part of smart cities, like being able to interact with your community, not just by physically having to be there in those shitty meetings, but also being able to vote on your phone and say, hey, this is a thing I think we need.
Does the smart city inevitably create some economic divide between those who have the money for $1,000 smartphone and those who don't?
Well, that's the thing. So, one, I would say that divide already exists, and if we think it doesn't, we're lying to ourselves.
Sure, totally.
And
does it make it
two,
worse though?
I think it not fixes, but I think it helps make it better, because if it's much easier to get a cell phone and use that cell phone as your device than to buy a laptop or a desktop computer, right? And so I used to work in human resources, and so I used to talk about this a lot. But, when we're talking about recruitment, we need to be able to have things that are accessible on the phone for people, because the minute that we make things like job applications and stuff like that difficult to do mobily or on mobile, we are basically nullifying a portion of the population. So I think a lot more people do have access to smartphones. I need to look at the number to make sure I'm correct.
So that brings up like an interesting thing. So then do you have to have the non-governmental governmental community who's like, this is the universally acceptable job application form?
People would hate that.
Right? That's how we got in this predicament in the first place.
Well, yeah, but we have to have, we are a humongous country.
Sure.
We have to have scalable systems.
Yeah. No, I get it.
And so, if it were up to me, which it's not, but if it were, yes, we should have one form
right.
that is universal.
Right.
Because, all jobs have the same basic components, every job. And so we would need to make it so that, it would all be able to be done on mobile, and we could go online on our phone and look at it, and it wouldn't differentiate. And it shouldn't.
So then
people are going to hate that, but that's okay.
No, but it begs this question: is why did the state? I mean, this goes way back. I'm all for that. As somebody who lives on a border between two states, for me, we started this whole thing with how the different states make you feel, and there could not be a bigger difference between Illinois and Wisconsin. While we are two Midwestern states, it is proven fact that if you have an Illinois license plate and you're driving in Wisconsin, chances are if you are 5 miles over the speed limit, your ass is getting pulled over, and that's the end of it. That's just the reality. Because we put up toll roads to charge them and us, and they got mad, so they pull us over and they get it back on tickets. But the two states are so different, so it makes it so hard to kind of operate between the two. And so we have all these states that are drastically different. We know that they all play together really well. We know that whole hierarchy. I mean, do we need to get to a place where we're breaking down these? I mean, I don't know if we should say that the artificial walls of the states need to get broken down, but will we ever really become smarter as a population unless we get rid of some of this old baggage of these lines and these? You said the form, which got me thinking about, if I do business in Wisconsin, then I got to fill out this stupid ass tax form, and I got to do this one, and I got to go to this governmental thing, and this is a ridiculous mess.
I don't think it's the lines. The lines are made up constructs. It's not the lines. It's our unwillingness to have uncomfortable conversations. If, in my opinion, that's every single thing boils down to that. The lines exist because it makes it easy to do business, all these things. But the lines are constructs that we've made. And the reason that, like you said, you go to Wisconsin, you get pulled over if you go 5 minutes over the speed limit, we've lost the ability to have difficult conversations with people we don't agree with. Yeah. And I think that not being able to have a conversation then creates, not only do you have the line, then you have these walls being built up.
Divide,
Exactly. And so then there's you versus me. Exactly. And so I think that that's the real solution. We just have to be able to talk to each other, and it's uncomfortable. It's not fun. It's hard. And so people don't want to do it.
So I'm going to take it back to the recent events in Florida with the school getting shot up and what the kids, I'm again, painting strokes, and I don't like to do that, but what the kids have been able to do with organizing a rally across the United States, and now what the teachers are doing to organize a rally. And arguably, we'd like to think that it's just as simple as a bunch of people got on Facebook and Twitter, and they were able to do that. But as somebody who runs a conference and knows how many hundreds of thousands of dollars it takes to get things like a stage and coordinate, I know it's just not that simple. But yet the groundswell started from, being able to communicate over a platform like Facebook and Twitter. How, is that the level of, is platforms like that going to be how we influence change as a community versus us kind of taking the old approach of go to the community meeting? I mean, we can just, is it better? In fact, James asked us this question, like, how do you stop the activists? And, does the complexity of a big city, do you need that in a smaller city, or vice versa, right? Can you simplify some? And I mean, maybe we don't play the same game. Maybe we change the game that we're playing and like what happened or what's going on with the kids or with gun control in schools.
I mean, I think we have to use the platforms for like Twitter and other social media platforms. We can use those to connect and get the word out, because I think that's great. But I do still think we still have to be active in our communities in more offline ways as well. I don't think we should
the physical act of being active, like actually going and meeting somebody.
I think that's a a huge part of it, because when we look at and again, I'm not an expert. This is just light research that I've done. But when we've looked at kids that are online more now, right? They're able to have phones. They're online a lot more. I was probably the last generation that grew up without a real tight internet connection. I had the dial up and all that.
Amen.
And so and my mom would kick me off because she'd want to call my grandma. It's like, no,
so we're close to the same
chat. Why?
Yeah.
And so I was like the last generation that had that. And what I've seen and read is like kids are having a lot more trouble dealing with conflict. Their resilience is going down, and it's not every generation says this about every younger generation, but we do have to be realistic about the changes that we've introduced to people and how that affects their psychology. And so I think that the act of physically interacting with people in our community, even if we're not like sitting in a really terrible community meeting, which I don't think we need, but interacting physically with the people around us, that's how we're able to understand how to process and have conflict in a productive way. We cannot be good citizens and we cannot have good relationships without a level of conflict, but we have to be okay to talk through that and work through those issues. And I guess it's just really frustrating to me because I've traveled all over the US too, and no, people aren't different. We're all the same, like around the world. We all want to be seen and heard. We want to be loved, and we want to feel safe. Done. I've described everyone everywhere.
We want to provide for our family. We want to feel like we did a good job or a service to one another. I totally agree.
There's just no difference. And so physically being around people in your community and using the technology we have to connect and get the word out and have a platform is amazing. But I don't think that it can be a replacement for being an active participant within your own community, like saying hello to your neighbors and
I totally agree. When we started that conference, I was told by so many people this was the stupidest thing that we could ever do. A virtual conference is the only thing to do. Nobody wants to show up when they can just get on their computer. Now this is 8 years ago. No need. Why? We don't. Nobody wants to get together, very few developers ever see anything other than their shoes. I mean, I could just go on. And I said, that's not what I want to do. Like, we all need to still go meet one another and have the conversation that we can't have online. We need to meet one's family. We need to give one another a hug and celebrate the fact of one's successes over the years. And that's kind of transcended to, like, in the beginning, it was very kind of like uncomfortable for people to where now, to see a room of 1,000 people actually hug one another is completely feasible. And it's taken a long time to get to that place. But you're right. We have to be together.
I think the thing that technology has provided us is a way to be together more mindfully. Because when we put down our computers and we're in a room together, we're able to talk about things that actually matter if we choose, because we can use that time to be more thoughtful. Whereas, we can use technology to do work and send messages and all that. Exactly.
It's a tool.
But we can actually create more community if we're standing next to one another.
So, something that I love this. I love this conversation. So something that has like smacked me upside the head, and anybody who's listening to this, I would be curious for you to leave a comment how you would define this. The past year, as somebody who's been deeply involved in community for the past 15 years, 20 years, it's dawned on me that the word community, while means something drastically different in the context that it's used. And I was not mindful enough of how I was using that word. And I don't mean it to sound derogatory, but I'm curious how you would define community.
I define community as a couple different things. So to me, a community is not necessarily a family. It's a group of people that are, that's such a good question. Oh my gosh. Oh God, do I have a definition? How would I define it? So,
do you use it universally the same way every time that you say it?
No. It's different. It's different. So, like, I have a work community.
Sure.
I have a community around me that's like physical proximity. So, like, my neighbors. Sure. I have, honestly, I have like a conference community, which is more
sure.
like personal in a different way. So I guess it's the people that when I talk to them, it's different than friendship, right? Because people are going to have different opinions than me. Yep. They're going to be from different backgrounds from me. They've had different life experiences. So a community is a group of people who are able to have open and honest conversations with each other.
And I agree. And I asked that question, and I should start asking everybody.
That was real painful. That's a really good question. I don't like it. It's very hard.
Yeah, and so the reason I asked that is because I think we universally use that word. I'm gonna paint it a different way. So everybody's always got that little like, I don't know what the right adjective for this is, but I've always wondered, like, do you and I, when we grew up, I'm assuming you're not colorblind, but when we grew up and you were told this is the color green, mm-hmm. Do you and I see that color universally the same? And my belief is no. But I also believe we can't actually distinguish how we see them different. We're just told that that's green. And while mm-hmm. computers may say that this is a universal green, like that green doesn't mean the same green to you as it does to me. We just know it as green.
Right.
So I say that because I think we use the word community pretty universally. And it's been this over the course of this last year where I've become way more mindful as to some think of community as like the succession plan for their community. So they almost interchange it twice. They talk about mm-hmm. people, but then they talk about this like group of things that are somehow going to service them in a different way. And it's like, well, that's not really the way I think of community. Like right. I think of community of like people who have this like common interest. It's a physical bond. It's not like, some demographic for your corporate motive. And
right.
Right. And so you get in these conversations with folks at times, and now I'm finding myself going, I'm not sure that you and I actually agree as to what that means. Like we're saying the same words, but I'm not sure what we really have the same intentions.
What does community mean to you?
I would say very much the same. For me, it is a group of like-minded people who have some set of common interests and are willing to kind of raise a tide that lifts all boats. Mm-hmm. So, and you are part of multiple communities. Like I was a coach, I coach soccer, and mm-hmm. my soccer community, my soccer family was mm-hmm. certainly, there was no intersection or union. I mean, I guess maybe there was a few people who were in the tech community.
Right.
But I think there are people who look at the tech community and they think of succession plans and filling pipelines and that, which is a demographic and not the community.
Yeah.
And, big city, little city, those words, those things start to mean different things.
And I guess as I'm thinking about it, as you're talking, you said like there's a like-mindedness, right, in a community. And I actually think that it's not so much in my opinion, it's not so much a like-mindedness, but a common thread.
Yeah, that's really what I meant. A common thread isn't much better. There's something that has joined them, which is what put that group of people together. And James said this actually in the comments. Spiritual groups, right? User groups. Mm-hmm. Those are very good, like, common threads of like, hey, everybody's united in at least this one way. And actually, when I think of that conference, there's typically multiple within inside of one, right? Everybody showed up to the conference because they showed up. Whatever, it doesn't even matter why they came, but they all came. And so you and I, we go, and we already have one thing in common, right? We took the step, we showed up. And then you go to a session, right? And that session is yet another set of community. Maybe you like the speaker, maybe you like the topic, maybe you didn't know anything about it. And yet everybody who's sitting in that room, whether they know anything about that shit or not, they're already united in the fact that everybody showed up to that thing. And so you already have something in common with those who are around you. And I don't know that everybody necessarily realizes that. Like, you walked into a room of 100 people, you have 100 people who are already have something in common. And it's so diverse in that. And then, it kind of onions out from there. So,
and I think we forget about the power that has. Is so, like, even if you share like that one common thread, right? And you go into the room and there's 100 people there, and now you're sharing that one experience, the ability to start all those new conversations with people that you otherwise would maybe never have met, would never have had a basis to start talking to. You now have this like jumping point to create an entire, like, not just a community, but maybe a close relationship as well.
Yeah,
and
you have a reason to say hi. Right, you have a reason to say hi. I'm going to take this kind of full circle. It's back to like the walking down the street in the smart city, and seeing the new place and stopping by and saying hi or whatever.
Because you're a new business there, or you're a new person there. Like, we've been in our neighborhood and we just walk into random businesses and
you're in Portland. Like, that's expected. That's what they do.
It is expected. That is what we do. That is true.
Keep it weird. You went from one keep it weird to keep it more weird.
Yeah, and they fight over who had it first, which is also very weird. Like, someone wants to own that.
There's a theme.
It's
called Keep It Weird.
Weird.
Okay, I'm gonna pause the conversation there, and at the end of every one of these conversations, I like to extend a bit of gratitude and acknowledge the person. And I would like to acknowledge you for not just being on Ask That, but for sharing this and for sharing with the community and being involved with the community. I know that you're out there and about, and it can be hard at times, and it can be so fulfilling at times. And for that, I thank you for everything that you do, because I think it's cool.
Well, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
It is, and it's a fantastic conversation. I think it's going to lead me to my last question, and it's a bit prompted by one of the comments. Knowing everything that we talked about, knowing that I think that our world, our self-person, everything is always in a constant set of change. What is it, or how is it that somebody can try to influence things? I mean, we kind of talked about how the system's broken and, whatever, but how do you feel that we can play in this world or in our city and actually influence change for the better?
That is an amazing question, and one that I ask myself a lot, because it feels overwhelming sometimes. I think the first thing is education. So there, and you'd mentioned, after if there were resources that I had to share them, and I have them, so I'll share them. But educating yourself on the things that you're interested in within your community. So not just like the community meetings, but talking to people and understanding what's out there so that you know what you've even got to work with, right? You've got to get a baseline of data and information to know what to work with. So education. And then I think that it does take a little bit of internal willingness to be curious and ask questions and start conversations with people that maybe you normally wouldn't. And because that's the hardest thing, is getting started, right? So if we've got that knowledge and education, and then by nature, humans are curious. Use that curiosity to ask questions. And just by doing that, you're inserting yourself into that conversation so that you can help make a change.
Yeah, one thing I say at the start of that conference is, everybody who's there showed up. You're already better than the majority of people out there because you took a step. That's it. All you had to do is walk. Granted, yes, there's a cost involved. You got to drive. You got to set aside time. But to show up, you're like 75% of the way there.
Oh,
There's
for sure.
So many people who just don't show up, and it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
Because it is easy.
It is.
All right. With that being said, Marisa, how can people find you? Where are you?
I am on the Twitters, so I'm on there. It's just Marisa Morby, 1S. And I always give out my email. I probably shouldn't, but I like email, so that's cool.
Believe me, everybody's got it already. Somebody's got it.
So yeah, email and Twitter. Do I need to say what they are?
No, I've got your website.
Okay.
We'll link you up. We'll link up below for anybody who wants to go find you. And it's been a fantastic conversation.
It's been great, and I'll send you all my books and all my links. I've been curating a whole bunch of stuff, so be aware and afraid.
All right. With that being said, folks, this has been one fruitful conversation. I'm curious what you think about the smart city, and I know that there are a number of countries who listen and watch this. What makes your city good, different? Leave us a comment. Hit Marisa up. Hit me up. We'll chime in for sure. And with that being said, that's been another Ask That. We'll see you next time.